Okay, I want to get right into this today, guys, because there's actually a lot that I want to talk about. And we are on, this is Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. That's me, reading through the Bible every day chronologically, so we can go and do it historically. And today is day 3. It is January 3rd. And today we are focusing on Genesis 7 through 10. There's also some Chronicles in there which discuss the generations of Noah. So, First Chronicles in there. So, this is the story of Noah, which I feel like this is a story that we have heard a million times before. Even people who don't know, never read their Bible, have probably heard the story of Noah, the land that's flooding. So, we've just come from a place where, or just read about where Noah was righteous and God gave him a job. God told him to build an ark. God told him to have the animals on the ark. And God told him to have his family, his wife, 3 of his sons, and his 3 sons' wives on the ark with him. And then he obeyed everything that God told him to do. And then we bring ourselves to chapter 7, and this is where the flood covers the earth. And so a couple of things that I have noticed, and what I do is when I read this, uh, I've read this a few times before, uh, but what I do is each time I read it, I pray before I read, and I just ask God to show me what it is in the Word that He wants me to see, or whatever it might be that would be interesting. I ask Him to show me His Word. I ask Him to help me understand it. I ask Him to increase my faith as I read it. So as I read these things, these are just kind of these fired off things that stand out to me. And in this chapter, these few chapters, there are actually a lot. So I'm going to try and make it as short as possible, um, but still keeping to everything that's in there. But I feel like we could go on and on for a while, but I'm going to keep it kind of short. So, anyway, what I noticed in here is in the last chapter, God tells him to take pairs of animals. In this chapter, we see right in verse 2, he says, take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, and then 1 pair of every unclean animal. And the interesting thing that I've noted here is that there's been no time before this where God has talked about clean versus unclean animals. So in those first 6 chapters that we've read, there's nothing that we know about clean animals. We have no details on what that might mean. So I'm thinking that the reader would have known what that meant. So it leads me to believe that, again, we're going to go back to who the author is. If this is an author much later in time, an author where something was already established that there were clean and unclean animals, and very clearly established, maybe these were traditions that they lived over and over and over again. And so, generation through generation, that these were things that they had already learned that God had told them to do. And we aren't privy to that information yet. So we haven't been given that information by this author yet. But it's in there. And so it seems like somebody had to know what it was that they were talking about. So one of the next things that I wanted to note that I found important was in verse 8. If I read verse 8, it says, pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds and of all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And then if I go follow down, I'm going to go hit verse 15 where it says, pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. And one of the things that has always been a question is where does Noah get the animals? Does he find them? Why would they come in? It looks to me miraculously that these animals came to him, and all he had to do was open the door to let them in. Also looks as if they didn't come to him until they needed to. It wasn't as if they were sitting on his land or in his farm or whatever, wherever he lived before that. But it looks like those last 7 days where God made the announcement that the floods were going to come, that the animals all showed up. And so it looks like some kind of miraculous God-given gift that these animals came. And all Moses had to do was to prepare the ship, the boat, the ark, as he asked him to, and then to let those animals in at the time. All right, and in that same verse, in verse 15, I noticed that he says, so again, we're going back to verse 15, where it says, this is Genesis 7, verse 15, just to be more precise. Pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them. This is an expression, it's also actually in verse 22. So if I read down to verse 22, it says, everything on dry land that had the breath of its life in its nostrils died. So anything that wasn't on the boat that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. And this was fascinating to me because as soon as I read it, it rung to me where the breath of life came from and who had the breath of life and where I had heard that before. And it's actually, we're going to go all the way back to one of the earlier chapters. So Genesis 2:7 is where we first see that. And so if we go back to Genesis 2:7, it says, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. I had always thought man was the only one. And again, this could just be me, right? Like other people might be reading this and going, of course, I've read this a million times. I always thought the breath of life was only for man. And that is actually what distinctively separated us from animals, that we had the breath of life and they were actually just formed out of him speaking. It doesn't look like that's true. If I go to verse 2:19, it says, now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. So it seems like they are all, including us, are born out of the ground, and he gives them the breath of life. And so those are the ones that die. Everything that has the breath of life, except for the certain ones that he puts on the boat, are the things that die when the flood comes. And so we are all given the breath of life. And then so what then makes us uniquely different from the animals? Are we exactly the same? And I'm going to say no, because in that same chapter, God actually gives us headship over these animals. So I feel like the difference isn't the breath of life. The difference is that we are commanded to take care of them. So we are commanded to take care of the animals, just like Noah is commanded to bring the animals on the boat and to take care of them and to make sure that they survive and to make sure they can continue to pair up. So once again, this is a matter of our human responsibility of the area and of the land and of the things that God created. We are meant to take care of them. So he although we have some similarities in creation, he creates us as a step above the animals in order to take care and be responsible for them. Now, if we move on to chapter 8, one of the things that I noticed in chapter 8 is if we go to 8:20. So chapter 8 is where, so it's flooded, water comes up, the boat starts to rise, rain starts to fall down, and they're now just out in the middle of the water. Everything is dying. The trees are dying. Everything is dying. The animals are all dying. The humans are all dying. Everything is losing its life. And then Noah sends out the raven, which circles around. Noah sends out the dove. The dove then finally finds a branch of an olive tree. And so he notices that he can go back on land. So what I see in verse 20 is then Noah, so after they come out, Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. Again, going back to what I had said earlier about clean animals versus unclean animals, is he sacrificed these animals. And again, we don't have a huge picture of what that means, what that looks like. Why would God want us to sacrifice these animals? Cain and Abel gave their first fruits to the Lord. Don't necessarily notice if they sacrifice them. But here it clearly says they killed these animals, or Noah and his family killed these animals and sacrifice them to the Lord. What I also notice is that Noah built an altar to the Lord. So he built a very special place to go and sacrifice these animals to God. So he had a meeting place. He no longer necessarily meets with God one on one, but he has a meeting place to meet with God and to present God an offering. And it seems really important. For me, this brings me obviously to me going to church and me going to a particular place to not necessarily be in an altar with the Lord, but to spend time with the Lord. That there is a location where I have a picture where I'm closer to Him and I'm presenting to Him. So I'm presenting myself. I'm worshiping at this place, and so that's what Noah is doing at this altar because he's sacrificing his animals. And then it says here, so we know the Lord was pleased because it says in 21, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and then said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. So Noah's worship, Noah's sacrifice allowed God, pleased God enough, maybe allowed is definitely the wrong word, but pleased God enough that God decided he was no longer going to punish the entire world, even though he recognizes that we have evil inclinations in our hearts. And he's not going to destroy us because of this. He's still going to have a covenant with us, and he's still going to protect us, and he's still going to love on us. So he continues also to even have seed time and harvest. Now, if we go to Genesis 9, just moving right on into Genesis 9, this is where God makes a covenant with Noah. So at this point, we have not eaten animals. Noah hasn't eaten animals. And at this point, God gives him full reign over all animals to sacrifice, not just to sacrifice them to the Lord, because I hate using the word, but to kill them and eat them. And I don't know why I hate using that word, but from here on out, we can kill animals and we can eat animals. And then animals become afraid of us. So instinctively, they know that we can now eat them. And so now there is fear between humans and animals. So again, we find over and over and over again this responsibility that other things that are lower on the totem pole than us are punished because of the mistakes that we make. We have the ability, because of God, to make choices that please God. Noah made choices that pleased God. Abel made choices that pleased God. And yet we see all these people that make choices that don't please God, and then the world is punished because of it, which is fair because there are too many things that God gives us that we don't appreciate and value and honor. And as much as it pains us and it hurts us to say, why are these things happening in the world? The truth is that we don't honor and bless anything that God has given us. And so we need to spend more time, and I continue to say we, because I'm talking to the camera, but those of us that love God, those of us that follow Christ, those of us that believe he sacrificed himself for us, it is so important for us to honor God by doing the things that he asks of us because of how much he loves us, and because therefore we recognize how great he is and we love him in return. And with our love comes all of the obedience. And all of the obedience is actually really good. It is good things. We don't want to be a world where we're destroying each other. We don't want to be a world where everything is evil all the time, except for, I don't even want to say a couple of righteous people. The truth is that Noah was the only one that he said was righteous. It wasn't even that his kids were righteous. It's that he was, which, by the way, is another really amazing thing about God, because his kids survived because of his righteousness. So here we go again, that his children and their children and their children and their children all got blessings because of the righteousness and the faithfulness of Noah. So it's not that God wants to destroy us. God has boundaries. He has rules. He has things in place for us to be protected and for us to be better. I'm probably using all really bad language, but this is for us. These things are in place for the benefit and the joy of us as human beings. And we devalue that all the time. And we look on that like it's a burden. And the reality is that we need to look on that as if it's exactly what it has been given. It is a joyful blessing to honor those things. And so I want to move on because I want to read. Uh, we're still in Genesis 9, or moved on to Genesis. Well, beginning of Genesis 9. We're moving on to verse 9 in Genesis 9. And so if I move on, it says here in verse 9, let's see, I will establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you. So because Noah did what he did, a covenant is now made, a promise is kept. This is, I think, the first time that we see a covenant. I'm almost positive. I should have known that beforehand, but I'm almost positive this is the first time we see a covenant. This is the promise that is made, and it is now for Noah, and it is for Noah's children. So even when we say, going a little bit further down, Noah's children, Noah's one son, does a big mess up, the covenant is still kept in place. He still keeps his promise to his people that he said he was going to keep his promise to. And so he made this covenant between them. And we see this all the time. And I know this is something that we completely take for granted, but the rainbow is the visual picture of the promise that God made to Noah. And therefore, because he made it to Noah, and we believe in that God, the one and true God, we believe in that God, we believe that he sent Jesus. Because of that, that rainbow is also a promise to us that he will not destroy the entire world. And that is an amazing promise. And it's called a rainbow because it actually looks like a bow. If you think of a bow and arrow, it looks like a bow. And it comes obviously in the rain. So it's called a rainbow. And so it is made to protect us, and it is made to for us to remind ourselves every single time that we see it. I'm sure most of you will think that, I don't know, maybe just because I'm a girl, but every time I see a rainbow, it's funny, I have a very good friend who's on here who does this as well, taking pictures of that rainbow and posting them all over everything, sending them to friends, because there's something just marvelous about seeing a rainbow. Even if we see it in something as silly as a puddle, we get very excited about it. And it's a joy to look at it and to share it with other people and to want other people. I always run in the house and make everybody run outside. Everyone come outside. Look, there's a rainbow. And if there's a double rainbow, even better. So remember that this is not just something cool that we can look at, and this is not just a trick of our eyes or something like that. This is a promise that God made. This is something good for us. So every time we see it, we are to be reminded of what he did and then what he's preventing from doing in the future. Good reminder for us. All right, so I want to move down to verse 25. So after Noah lands, he works the ground and he makes vines and he drinks the wine from those vines. When he drinks the wine from those vines, he gets drunk and he is naked. And then his son comes in, Ham comes in, and he sees him. And then he goes out and he kind of gossips to his brothers, and then his brothers come in and his brothers cover him. Because of this, Ham's son is cursed. We go again, see this pattern? Sons, parents, right? Like there's this perpetual cycle that we are not just responsible for ourselves, but we're responsible for everybody around us as well. And he curses Canaan because Canaan is Ham's son, which for a lot of you guys, you realize that Canaan is Israel. It's this area inside of Israel. And so it starts out with his name, which is Canaan, ends up being a land, which we're going to see a ton of that coming up in the genealogy. And so he curses his son. So his son has to take on the curse of Ham, who looked on to Noah's nakedness. And so perpetually that those generations will all be cursed because of that. And they will not die. They will not perish with no hope, but they will be slaves to their brothers and all their brothers' children. So it seems like there's some pattern that in the future there will be some kind of, they will have to take care of their brothers, that they will never be the ones in power. They will never be the ones that are in control of everything, but they will always be the ones that are a little bit less than any of their brothers' descendants. And if we move on to Genesis 10, I want to finish up here, moving on to Genesis 10. This is where we see a lot of genealogy. And It looks to me like Ham, which is funny because he is the father of Canaan, who eventually gets cursed, but he has a huge area of land. You can see all of the people groups that he fathers over generations. And of course, we see Japheth as well. One of the things that I noticed was descendants of Shem. If going to verse 21, if the older brother is Japheth, which is unique in that anytime that they're talked about. So if we go back to verse 18, it says the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And you would think that they would be in some kind of chronological order, like first, last son last. And it doesn't look like they're that way because Japheth is definitely an older brother. And so if he's not the youngest, why is he pronounced as the youngest? Not too sure of that, but I definitely noticed that. And they hold a huge amount of area, huge amount of land. These names eventually become territories, eventually become people groups, and then probably as we go along, we're going to see some more of these people groups in here. And then when we go right into, and we're in Chronicles, it shows very similar genealogy to what we saw in Noah. And so I don't even know if I introduced what we were doing today, but this was day 3, and this was Genesis 7 through 10 and some Chronicles. And if this video was at all a blessing to you, I would love if you subscribed to the channel, and I would love if you share this with other people. You know, as always, my goal is to have everybody reading their Bible. And so especially if you are somebody in the family of faith, I would love if you were reading your Bible, because this is where we learn and we grow and our faith strengthens. And so if you want to comment, I would love to have your comments. I want to see and hear what you saw in the chapter. Did you see some of the same things I saw? Or did you see something completely different? Something else really big and strong stood out to you? So please share with me, and please share this video. And I hope this has been a blessing, and I will see you tomorrow.